High school player, you're undefeated. You went to Notre Dame, won a national championship.
Right.
Captain.
Yeah.
Went to Pittsburgh, 4 Super Bowls. You know, us common folks look at you and say you've done it all. But your perspective, is there anything football-wise that you've ever said to yourself, gosh, I wish I could have done this, or I wish I had achieved that, or do you feel the same way we do?
You know, no, there's nothing. You got so much talent. You got what God gave you, you know, and hopefully you can work with that talent. And so there comes a part of reality. And as I look back on my career, and I go, okay, fine, you know, oh, I didn't make All-Pro. I'm not going to go into the Hall of Fame. I didn't make an All-American at the university. But I look at the opportunities I had to play, the guys I played with, and the success that we had as organizations, as a team, coming out of the coaches, the leadership, the assistant coaches, what they taught me, things that got me into the next level, and a chance to play, you know, with Pittsburgh. And then it's all timing. So how does, you know, my question to myself, and what I reflect back on is, how does that happen? You know, is it because of you? I'd like to take credit because every place I've been, I won. But it's not, you know, you go, well, okay, fine, it's a team sport, you know, so anything that happens. So you look at leadership, you look at head coaches, you look at the players that assemble, you get the most out of those players, and, you know, and you win some games. And it's the same thing at every level that I've been associated with. So I look back and go, yeah, there's not much more I could ever ask from a career perspective.
Well, Mr. Rooney said there was never a nicer young man. He called you a young man.
That's right.
Because I guess that's what you were when you were in Pittsburgh. There was never a nicer young man to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And obviously, those people that have been around you now have found that you are a great person. Today, when you look at pro football, does it kind of cringe? Do you kind of cringe when you see some of the people that are drafted, and are they not looking at characters much like they did when you played?
Well, you know, I think it all comes from a different perspective. Given the 21st century, given the technology, given the expansion of news media, given television stations, given YouTube, given all that exposure that's out there, that every time a player may open his mouth, now he has to be more careful than he's ever been in the past. And actions need to be watched. We had our characters back at that period of time, whether it be in the 60s and the 70s and through the 80s. Just nobody ever talked about it, or it didn't get out that much. So, you know, in my case specifically, is that I've always felt a responsibility as an athlete, giving back to a community, or being part of an organization. And part of that's my upbringing, part of it's coming out of the Midwest, part of it's having parochial education in grade school and high school and college. And so, you know, that's all part of it. And you have players like that today. Unfortunately, they may not get the press as much as those who open their mouths or do stupid things or make mistakes or get themselves into trouble, because that's what we show, and that's what the media talks about.
You know,
so,
I'm doing a hog here. I'll let these other people talk, but my final question is, you still live in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Do you and Bradshaw and Mean Joe Green and people like, do you guys still get together and talk about how great your teams were?
Yeah, because no one else will talk to us about it. So we have to talk amongst ourselves about how great we were, and we only get better, as you understand, over the years. You know, there is a core. There's a core of former players that stayed in Pittsburgh that we get a chance to get together. Now, Bradshaw is not one of those guys. He's big. I mean, he's a star, you know. Joe Green lives in Texas, and although he's associated with the organization, we don't get to see him as much as those who live. So I get to see Franco Harris and Lynn Swan and Jack Ham and Mike Wagner, guys who play the offensive line, who nobody ever remembers who they were outside of Mike Webster, but we get to see those guys. And periodically we get a chance to talk. So there's functions that take place. There's a golf tournament here, there's a dinner there. We may get together for lunch every now and then, but more often than not, people have their families families, they got their careers, and talk about how great we were.
Well, it was a pleasure talking to you. You are a
Thanks.
class act, like I told you, and we really appreciate you being here, and I'll let someone else ask some questions.
Obviously, the lockout's going on right now.
Yeah.
What's that like for you to see the goings on, especially with insurance and medical being on the docket?
On the docket, I'm not as familiar, in all honesty, of what they're fighting for, because it's not my fight, basically. I will reap whatever rewards that they give to retired players that had been on the table, and so there's a big chunk of money that will come to us eventually within this next CBA. But it's kind of interesting that has taken place. There's some issues, but I don't know how strongly they believe in those issues. It's not like going back to free agency. That fight that had started back in the 60s and 70 and 74 and then 81, and finally the strike-shortened year in free agency became a big part. Made it to where it is today, where players and it's all from their own point of view, given the world in which they know. So how do they compare? Well, look at all the money that's being made, and I make this game. Well, players do make the game, but I always like to remind them of the fact that there's a reason that they have a cage on their helmets and a big number on their back, because they can just take you out and put somebody else back in. And so it's a defined period of time in which you have an opportunity to play. The game of football is a vocation, and it's not a career. There's a short period of time in which you get to play it. So every time that you may miss a season, you don't tack it on at the end. You get 3.5 years as the average lifespan of a player. And so there will be those that play 12, 14, 15 years, but again, it's the top of that arch, and that play the game. So the majority of guys, it's a paycheck. You cannot make the money that you make somewhere off the street. So take advantage of what happens. Fight for what's right, and eventually, I think personally, when it gets pushed, or when they start pushing, and the season's around the corner, and I'm not getting paid, things will happen quickly. And there's, we all like to say there's too much money, and what's the principles and who's going to give, and there'll be some give and take, and they're not dumb people out there, and now there's not some players are not real bright, but those people out there that are ultimately going to come together on this collective bargaining agreement, we'll work it out.
Does it dismay you at all that probably some of your ex teammates and friends maybe aren't in the best health, or maybe haven't been taken care of as well as they would have hoped, or is that something that
part of it is this. And I mean, there's two sides. Obviously, it's a game that you play, and the money's been made, and owners make money, and in television contracts, and everybody gets tied up in this. But on the other side, I say, listen, when you signed that agreement, when you signed that contract, you didn't ask what the retirement plan was. You didn't ask what health care was. You wanted to play football, and players still want to play football, and and they have health care, and they are getting better in taking care of players, and that's because people have fought for it. And there's been advocacy groups that have taken care of the dementia question, the Mackey rule. There is now long-term health care benefits for retired players. There are facilities in which they can get knee replacements, hip replacements, and see doctors and so on. So those things have taken, because of players and active players and those who have been very strong in their advocacy for change. that has taken place. So, but you know, you're coming out of college, drafted, and I don't think these guys are any different. This is what I work for. You know, I'm a part of the team. I'm a part of the organization, and I want to play. And so there's some ego, and you get a chance, and you got a right to go back to your hometown and stand on the street corner, put your chest out there, and say, "Look at me now." You know, and you do, and that only lasts for a short period of time. You know, because then you got to come back again. You got to make the team. You got to make the team. You got to make the team. And so.
So they got to know a little bit what they're getting into.
Yeah, they got to go. And as I said, it's like, you know, you didn't play this game for security at the end. You know, hopefully it comes. You know, hopefully you can make some money. Hopefully, but for the majority of players, it's a stepping stone. You know, you make a nice chunk of money for a period of time while you're playing. As I said, the average life is 3.5 years. It's not enough to retire on. You know, you're going to have to do something and use it to propel you into your life's work, as Chuck Knoll, our former head coach, always liked to say.
Motivational speaker or something of that sort.
Yeah, you can't do anything else.
Oh, come on.
You talk about it.
You know, you were talking about you know, some of the characters and you know, the way some of the things get out in the media. I'm just curious, as a Steeler, did you follow any of the stuff with Rashard Mendenhall?
It was in my paper. You know, it was in the paper, so you go.
I didn't know if that's what you were alluding to.
So I was alluding to. You go, oh, man. You know, it's a lesson. It's a lesson he has learned or will learn. You know, about what you can. And you know, we didn't have tweeting back then. You know, we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have those things. You know, because what we had was we didn't even have a whole lot of recorders. You know, then I could always come back and say, "Oh, they misquoted me." Those guys, you know, they wrote that down. They wrote it down wrong.